We continue our reading of Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus, an invitation to spend a year with your best friend, a daily devotional by author George R. Knight. Today's reading, July 15, a disgusting parable. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first." And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the householder. Matthew 20, 8-11. Some of Jesus' parables are more disgusting than others. Near the top of the list in this category is the one about the farmer in Matthew 20, verse 1-16. It tells about a householder, God, who goes out to hire day laborers for his vineyard. Scripture often refers to Israel as God's vineyard. See Isaiah 5, 1-7. At the beginning of the 12-hour workday, the landlord makes a formal agreement with the available workers to pay a denarius for a full day's labor. But the farmer is desperate because when grapes ripen, they must be harvested immediately, or many of them will spoil. So he returns repeatedly to hire more laborers. His last trip is at the 11th hour when the day is almost over. The implication is that the latter workers can't be too ambitious, or they would have been employed earlier. But they must eat, so they show up for work anyway. The story's irritating aspect begins in verse 8, when at the end of the day, the landlord lines the workers up in the reverse order from which he hired them. Thus, the last get paid first. Then, in plain view of the others, he pays those 1-hour laborers 1 denarius, a full day's pay. Now, what do you think is going on in the minds of those who spent all day in the vineyard? Arithmetic. If those guys got a full day's pay for 1 hour's work, the logic runs, we deserve 12 days' pay. That is 2 weeks' earnings, if you subtract the Sabbath. At last, they rejoice, we have discovered an employer who will allow us to get ahead. Then comes the bombshell. Everyone gets paid exactly the same pay. No wonder they complain. I was a construction worker when I first read Matthew 20, and I grumbled with them. To me, it was a travesty of justice. And Peter undoubtedly had the same reaction. We need to remember that Jesus gave the parable in response to his question of Matthew 19:27. What do we get? His mind had been on extra special honors. He liked the first part of Christ's answer, in which he and other disciples were to have thrones and riches. That is what he wanted to hear. But in Matthew 20, he gets what he needs to hear, and that wasn't so pleasant. This concludes our reading today of Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus.